Good afternoon again. I come to you now in my capacity as an alumnus of the school, and I have the honor of welcoming you, graduates, to a robust community of 15,000 plus GSD alumni and over 400,000 Harvard alumni globally. That's the size of a small nation, if you think of it. Let it sink in. Now, our very dear alumni relations staff think that I'm going to wear this hat. And I know a lot of you want this hat, so I'll take bids after this. The hat's pretty nice, but I think I look better without it. And it's really warm, so. But the cap is meant to make you want to make lots of return visits, lots of donations. Congratulations to all the graduates on your hard work and dedication. It's been a privilege to observe it. You are leaving the school in a time of strife and division in the world. But alumni everywhere work hard after they leave this place, whether they loved it or not, because they came to believe while they were here that speculative design and planning are needed more than ever to imagine a socially just and environmental future for everybody. For me, the most enduring thing that happens on the transect of time from your studies here to your professional life is the fabric of relationships you form in the trays and in the classroom. I remain close with many classmates from nearly 40 years ago. You will do this too. I can happily attest that the landscape architecture cohort sitting here this afternoon has bonded immeasurably, and they really don't want to leave each other, and they have changed us in ways we can already feel. Honestly, it's one fantastic class, and I trust this is true for the other programs too. I can tell it's true for the Master of Design Engineering. We want you to remain close to the school. You are probably glad to get away for a while, but we do want you to come back and give back and come often. Let the GSD be a vehicle of exchange for you and of community as we all face the challenges of the larger world out there. Again, I want to congratulate the class of 2024. Now it's my distinct honor to introduce our Class Day speaker, Karenna Gore. Karenna is the founder and executive director of the Center for Earth Ethics, and she's the visiting professor of practice of Earth Ethics at the Union Theological Seminary in New York. Karenna formed the center in 2015 to address the moral and spiritual dimensions of the climate crisis. Working at the intersection of values, ethics, and ecology, she guides the center's public programs, educational initiatives, and movement building. Is there any doubt that we have things in common with her? None. Karenna lives out what I hope you all aspire to. Through her work and her words, she lives an activist practice. She demonstrates in matters of climate risk, in public health and social justice, what I think you can do through design and planning activism. In Thomas Markuson's definition, and I'm quoting here, design activism represents the role of design in promoting change, raising awareness around values and belief systems, and questioning the constraints that mass production and consumerism place on everyday lives. In her best-selling book from 2006, Lighting the Way, 9 Women Who Changed Modern America, Karenna offers stories of, and these are her own words, quote, those who fought against cynicism by keeping politics grounded in service, end quote. Doesn't that sound relevant right now? These are narratives of women activists who tackled hard questions, just like you will do. Karenna is a graduate of Harvard College with a law degree from Columbia and a master in social ethics from the Union Theological Seminary, where she remains their astute and devoted leader. We're fortunate to have her with us today. Please join me in welcoming Karenna to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Hildebrand. Thank you to Dean Sarah Whiting, to Raquel Rivera and Erica George, and everyone who has made me feel so welcome here today. And I am really impressed and inspired hearing about all the work that you all are doing. I'm honored to be here. Congratulations to the class of 2024. You did it. You did it. You're now at the finish line, and I'm delighted to greet you on such a festive occasion. In fact, there's almost nothing now between you and celebrating your degree, except me and my speech. So I will do my best to make it reasonably brief, but I do want to talk to you about the world you're entering and our need for a built environment that works within the living and intelligent design of the Earth. Of course, that may sound absurd. Many of us don't think of the Earth as designed at all. We think of it as natural. And yet, it came into existence, and its creation followed certain design principles. First, it was well located, with a good site and orientation. It revolves around the sun in the perfect orbit to sustain life, the so-called Goldilocks zone, not too hot, not too cold. Second, it was constructed from good materials. It has abundant water and plenty of land to support the lives of an immense variety of species. It has air and sunlight to make photosynthesis of plants possible, a wide range of minerals and medicines. It has everything we have ever needed. And as if this was not enough, there are other design features that improve it some more. Surrounding the Earth are thin layers of atmosphere that NASA has compared to a multi-leveled cake. Each layer protects us, including the ozone, which absorbs radiation and ultraviolet light from the sun. In short, it's a perfect design. Most of us don't really take the time to appreciate that, but now and then, it is possible to glimpse unexpected flourishes that remind us. For example, many of you surely have been looking up into the sky this spring. Perhaps you saw the aurora borealis or northern lights 2 weeks ago. They could be seen shimmering above Boston as the result of a huge solar flare a few days before that, reminding us how close we are to the sun, the source of light and life and new energy, which perhaps some needed a reminder of. Or the eclipse a few weeks before that. What are the chances that our moon would exactly fill up the circle of the sun? But it does. The moon is 400 times smaller than the sun, and it is 400 times closer than the sun. It's a perfect match. But this planet that is home to at least 8.7 million species does apparently have a design flaw. Out of those millions, one species has become so powerful and so confused that it not only threatens many of the others, it threatens the web of life as a whole. That species, of course, is Homo sapiens. We urgently need to design anew in order to address the problems that we are causing to our home. And that is where I hope you will find your calling. We need you, we need your energy, your insights, your work ethic, and especially your creativity. I cannot pretend to be an expert in architecture or landscape architecture or urban planning design, any of the disciplines that you all are doing such important work in. When I reflect back on my time at Harvard as an undergraduate, I remember a somewhat bewildering architectural assortment of dorms and halls and classrooms that looked and felt very different from each other. There is here a mix of old and new, but I've always felt a kind of gravitational pull from the past. as if it still has a message for us today. Even here, by the beautiful Gund Hall, built in 1972, making it the same age as me, we don't escape the long shadow of Harvard's history. At times, it is literally a shadow cast by the enormity of Memorial Hall, Harvard's monument to the Civil War dead, just across the street, the other direction. Or nearby William James Hall, 15 stories tall, built in 1963 by Minoru Yamasaki, who also designed the World Trade Center. It is confusing in a way to see such a tall, modern building named after a teacher and philosopher who did most of his work in the 19th century. But I think William James would enjoy knowing of his ongoing towering relevance, and I want to bring his voice here today as I begin my talk about ethics as inspiration. James once tried to describe the phenomenon of understanding ourselves to be part of a larger design without fully grasping how it was created and how it functions. Of human beings, he wrote, "We may be in the universe as dogs and cats are in our libraries, seeing the books and hearing the conversation, but having no inkling of the meaning of it all." So even in this place of great learning on this day of tremendous achievement, it is worth pausing a moment to consider what we do not know. Humility is a key ingredient of wonder and awe, as well as of a deeper level of understanding. At Memorial Hall and in many other locations of this campus, you will see the famous seal of the university, the 3 books with a syllable on each of them spelling out the word veritas, or truth. Like so many things at Harvard, the seal began with an act of design, a drawing in the very first record book of the college from 1643. In the original design, the 3rd book was turned over, face down, with the last syllable hovering over the back of it. Over time, this was changed so that all 3 books were drawn the same way, open, which is how we normally see it now. But every now and then, someone conjures the original. At the bicentennial celebration of Harvard in 1836, the historian Robert Winthrop gave a toast that wondered aloud about what he called the meaning of this mystical disposition of the word truth, explaining that he was, quote, endeavoring to extract a moral from it. Almost 200 years since Winthrop wrote those words and almost 400 years after Harvard was founded, I think we can find that moral. But perhaps we will evoke it rather than extract it. There is a special category of knowledge that comes from putting down the instructions we have been taught, and instead opening up to the way life is actually unfolding. In our time, it is the natural world that demands our full attention in this way. And we have the powers of both sentience and conscience to take it in. To be conscient is to be alert and aware and to think with our surroundings. It implies an ethical grounding. Ethics is not an exact science. It is the distinction between right and wrong and the implications for our behavior, both individual and collective. So ethics, of course, undergirds many aspects of our society, but it is most powerful when a deeply felt and widely shared sense of right and wrong is out of step with both laws and social norms. We know the times when this was true in the past in this country: the abolition of slavery, women's suffrage, the civil rights movement. And today it is the case for the ecological crisis. Most of what drives ecological destruction is not only perfectly legal, it is socially encouraged. We live in the shock of recognition that as a species we are destroying our own habitat. Even the most detached among us have sensed the ever-increasing scale and pace of what Gus Speth calls the 2 modern megatrends: pollution of the air, especially carbon and methane, and depletion of the landscapes, including forests, soils, waters, which are carbon sinks as well as life sources in other ways. We see the resulting change in weather, rising heat and extreme heat waves, droughts, wildfires, stronger storms, floods. It's what we call climate change. Polar ice caps, including the Great Greenland ice sheet, are melting faster and faster, and sea levels are rising. Right here in Boston, the water is at its highest level in recorded history, threatening the neighborhoods that press up against the harbor. About 1/6 of Boston sits on landfill, making the city vulnerable, especially since sea levels are projected to rise 2 to 4 feet by 2070. In Houston last weekend, freak storms accelerated by warming waters brought ferocious winds that shattered windows in high-rises, leaving shards of broken glass on the downtown streets. Many existing buildings all over the world simply weren't designed for the era that we have entered. As the human population continues to grow and as lifestyles in our part of the world are ever more consumerist and ever more exported, we are conscious of this new pattern. Of course, there are other components of the ecological crisis related to climate change, but also distinct. Chemical and plastic waste piles up and infiltrates everywhere. Water is depleted at a rate faster than it can be replenished. Habitats disappear from extraction of resources. And their habitats not only for animals and plants, many of which face extinction, but also for humans as well. People flee places that have been appropriated for extraction, as well as those that have become too hot, dry, or flooded in greater and greater numbers. We understand that this is only the beginning, and more people do feel a sense of uneasiness about it, yet we mainly carry on. After all, the main measurements cited for the success of an economy and a society and a nation do not even acknowledge pollution or depletion of nature. They treat them as what is called externalities, externalities that we do not need to count because they're not deemed to be relevant at all. One challenge we face is how to manage the uncertainty and calibrate our own sense of agency. This reminds me of a joke. So what's the difference between an optimist and a pessimist? A pessimist says, I just can't imagine how things could get much worse. And an optimist says, oh, I think I can. So actually, this crisis does not present us with a choice between optimism or pessimism so much as it is a call to integrity. We must see what is real beneath the sham and superficiality that we have all become accustomed to. An ethical lens can help. It starts with how we draw the circle of moral concern. A friend of mine once said that in any room where there are decisions made that impact the global environment, there should be 3 empty chairs, representing those who will be hurt first and worst by climate change, even though they've done the least to cause it and have the least say in the rooms where these decisions are made. 1 for the poor and marginalized peoples of the world, 1 for future generations, and 1 for all non-human life. And if you think about it, that would not only be more fair to each of these unacknowledged populations, it would also be more wise. We would not have gotten to this point of emergency had we kept their well-being in mind all along. The same activity that is the main driver of the climate crisis, the burning of fossil fuels, also causes local pollution that harms human health through the slow violence that causes cancer, asthma, heart disease, and other maladies. These polluting sites are sometimes concentrated in what are known as sacrifice zones, where residents have less political and economic power to fight back. Around the world, millions of people die every year from this pollution. And every year, the aggregate of that same pollution fills up the shared atmosphere more and more, causing the climate chaos that affects the whole world. And so we can feel the resonance of the words of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And those of the Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, who said, "We are here to awaken to the illusion of our separateness." The way we design our built environment must keep this wider circle of moral concern in mind, at least pausing to consider the question every time, who is this designed for, and whom else does it affect? The work of adaptation to climate change is, of course, essential. Our infrastructure was built for a different reality and is now vulnerable. It is critical it be upgraded and reimagined, especially for those 3 empty chairs. This not only means addressing the urgent need for cooling systems, green spaces, and trees to mitigate the urban heat island effect, and fortifying buildings for the stronger storms, and moving and transforming structures in flood zones, and so on. It also means anticipating a huge surge of migrants coming from the areas of the world that are increasingly on their way to be uninhabitable. Just a few days ago, the schools of Delhi had to close because the temperature hit 117 degrees. And we hear and see this kind of news again and again now. But we cannot focus on adaptation alone at the expense of what is known as mitigation, stopping the source of the climate-changing pollution, the greenhouse gas emissions. We're on a trajectory, after all. If we don't get off the trajectory, there's no set end point to adapt to. So in this country, buildings are responsible for 39% of total energy use, apparently. Transportation is 29%. Another study shows that globally, the built environment is responsible for 42% of annual emissions. And out of that, building operations are 27%, and the rest is from materials and construction and so on. The work of changing this is underway and merits your full attention as designers. From your choice of source materials and energy systems, the way you facilitate, to the way you facilitate new ways of moving around that are less carbon intensive, like walking and bicycling, which are better for human health and better for human culture. The good news about the very big footprint of the built environment is that you can play a very significant role in mitigating and finally stopping this crisis. Ethics involves moral reasoning, and to get that right, it is important to examine the root cause of a problem rather than only responding to its effects. Actions have consequences, whether or not they are taken into account and measured at the time they occur. In some teachings from Indic traditions, this is expressed as karma, and there is a reason why that word has made it into our colloquial usage. It is particularly important nowadays because in current climate discourse and practice, there are fewer outright deniers of the problem, but many of them have migrated to a position of only advocating for action at the level of effect, refusing to address the cause because doing so can disrupt entrenched systems of power. This approach includes pinning too much hope and faith on technologies such as those of carbon capture of emissions in lieu of stopping the emissions from happening in the first place. Or even shifting too much of our focus and energy on investing in the development of a form of geoengineering called solar radiation management, which would involve releasing reflective particles into the stratosphere to reflect back the sunlight in order to cool things down. It is not the Earth that needs fixing, it is us. So how is it that so much of human society has come to think of the Earth, air, water, soil, other species of life, as simply a backdrop or a set of resources, rather than integral to our bodies and our lives? Some say it goes all the way back to Plato, who posited a separation between matter and spirit, referred to as dualism, that threaded through European thinkers such as René Descartes and Francis Bacon. In the field of religion and ecology, which is one of those overlapping fields I work in to endeavor to do earth ethics, there is a focus on the interpretation of the concept of dominion from the book of Genesis, and a distortion of the concept of imago Dei, or the idea that human beings and only human beings are created in the image of God. In that same vein, a clue might be found in the conversion of the Roman Emperor Constantine to Christianity in the early 4th century, precipitating the marriage of institutional Christianity to empire and colonization. This played a big role in wiping out animistic spiritualities, sometimes referred to as pagan, that saw nature as sacred and alive with its own spirits, which made it a lot easier to think of rivers and forests and mountaintops as exploitable objects and resources rather than living beings. This is not, of course, a comment on the essence of Christianity, of course, just how it was interpreted and applied. Imperial forces like to extract resources and control local populations, and it's obviously self-serving for them to promote a belief system that is amenable to that exploitation. Then, in the 15th century, the great global power of the time, the Catholic Church, issued decrees, papal bulls they were called, that invoked the Bible and proclaimed that the land and the peoples of the Americas and Africa should be conquered, vanquished, and subdued. This led to a mindset that was instilled in the very beginning of the presence of people of European descent here in these lands, and also to what has been termed the doctrine of discovery, which has had legal application and is known by some indigenous scholars as the domination code. People living in these lands, in those lands at the time, were characterized as part of the flora and fauna to be dominated. And so the effort to dehumanize some people and the sense of license to pillage the natural world were linked. And in many ways, they still are. No matter how much people try to downplay or deny or get around it, ending racism is part of the call today as well. As far as Christian theology is concerned, there's a lot of work being done to redress this profound error, most notably by Pope Francis, who emphasizes dominion should be interpreted to mean responsible stewardship. But the thought form, human domination over the earth, which is seen as merely a set of objects and resources, has long since been secularized. We can see it in our built environment in many ways. And this is in part because our built environment reflects the way we conceive of and measure prosperity, wealth, and success. When the United Nations was founded in the wake of two devastating world wars, the US was ascendant in the world, and the way of thinking that was centered in Europe and the US became the basis of the economic development model. The thinking was also that to avoid military conflicts like that in the future, there must be more commerce, encapsulated in the saying, when goods don't cross borders, armies do. And thus, production and consumption cycles became associated and perhaps even confused with peace building. Money confused with virtue, development at the expense of nature, and commodification reigning over culture, community, and the commons. Bear in mind that the measurement of GDP was codified by the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944, even though its inventor, Simon Kuznets, warned not to use it for the purpose of measuring the health of a society because it does not count many of the things that matter most: pollution, depletion, inequality, or the positive effects of preservation, conservation, and care. And now the ecological crisis has gotten so extreme that the current Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, calls it a biosphere catastrophe and tries to rally the whole world to end what he calls the war on nature. What was originally seen as a backdrop to the work of development and prevention of war is now the main character with whom we as a species must make peace. And you are on the front lines. Having identified these root causes of the crisis, we can focus on another aspect of ethics: the relationship of means and ends, which we might also think of in terms of form and function. We can see how the form of our built environment has been shaped by the mandate to function in the old way, for the good of economic growth, automobiles, single-family homes on big lots, and so on. And now we're faced with a compelling new function or purpose, searching for new forms to reconcile and reconnect with the earth. Thomas Berry, a theologian who also studied geology and topography and called himself a geologian, offered a way forward when he said that the great work of our time is to realize that the universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. This shift in thought systems is already happening in wonderful ways in the professions you're entering. Landscape architects like GSD graduate Kate Orff are creating designs like the living breakwaters alongside my hometown of New York City, that not only repair damage done by climate impacts, they bring mitigation and adaptation together. There is a whole trend in restoration ecology that focuses on repairing biocultural relationships between people and the ecosystems they live in, as much as it focuses on repairing the landscape itself. There's an insight from indigenous knowledge that we humans can actually be a keystone species ourselves. My friend, the Dene scholar Lila June Johnston, calls for us to reimagine food systems as making homes for our food. Food, after all, comes from other living beings, not objects. And of course, there is an effort to make cities more responsive to people rather than cars, and more inclusive of nature for everyone who lives there. This shift to a communion of subjects can even happen with buildings, affecting our civic sensibility. It was no less a political figure than Winston Churchill who said, "We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us." In your designs of the future, buildings can not only emit less carbon, they can begin to sequester it and generate their own energy. In their own way, buildings can become better members of society, adapting to their surroundings, monitoring their own energy use, limiting emissions, participating with nature instead of competing against it. Finally, as an ethical matter, we must consider the role of local communities in designing their own environments, of course. In some cases, we need to heal the historical trauma of top-down impositions. Of course, the profession itself must be open to people of all walks of life, particularly those who have been excluded. And it is also true that experts and professionals of any kind often miss what is known best by those who are in intimate relationship with the places and ecosystems that they live within. And we also need designers to help us rethink the economic development model itself. This is true for those parts of the world where they have the opportunity to leapfrog over the mistakes that we've made here, and also to teach us new ways. That would mean pausing to ask those questions that prescient thinkers like the Bengali poet and educator Rabindranath Tagore often asked in his day. Progress toward what? And progress for whom? Thomas Berry tells a story in his book, The Dream of the Earth, about an encounter with a Lakota elder called Lame Deer that greatly affected him. It was in the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in 1975. He stood with the sacred pipe in his hands and bowed in turn to the four directions, Berry recalled. Then, after lifting his eyes to survey the vast cathedral, he turned to the audience. He said his own people had a different setting for communion with the Great Spirit, a setting out under the open sky with the mountains in the distance and the wind blowing through the trees and the earth under their feet, surrounded by the living sounds of the birds and insects. And so it is now with so many more people who have learned from indigenous ways and people, or who felt otherwise called to return to the earth for their sense of meaning and belonging. That is not to say that cathedrals are bad. In fact, they evoke an elevated feeling in part because of our awareness of the patient, long-term, multi-generational work that went into building them. Think of the builders who labor for something they will not see in their lifetimes. This transcendent sense can apply to the work of creating the built environment of the future, even if some of it is dismantling older, bigger is better models in favor of new ones. What needs to be under construction today is not one building, but many dwellings, shelters, sanctuaries, and habitats, which are all in relationship with each other and the community of life as a whole. It will take time and forbearance. It brings to mind powerful words I have heard offered from the Jewish tradition, from a rabbi who lived many centuries ago, Rabbi Tarfon, who said, "You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you permitted to abandon it." When enough people come together around an idea, they can move others, and they can, as we know, move buildings. In fact, the Swedenborg Chapel next to us was originally on the site of Gund Hall. It has an intimate relationship with the GSD. It was designed by Herbert Langford Warren, who is often credited as the founder of what was known as the Harvard School of Architecture. He added a stained glass window, several of them in the chapel, and one of them has a name. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. That could describe all of you here today on the eve of commencement, poised to begin your careers. I can't help but think of the line of scripture, which is also a song, knock and the door shall be opened unto you. And I know that all of us, all of life, will benefit from the doors that will open within the better designs you will bring to our planet. In closing, I invoke the words of Howard Thurman, the longtime dean of Marsh Chapel at Boston University, who was also a role model and an inspiration to Martin Luther King, beginning when King himself was a graduate school student in Boston, much like all of you. Thurman recalled the feeling he had as a child on the Atlantic coast of Florida. I had the sense that all things, the sand, the sea, the stars, the night, and I, were one lung through which all life breathed. Not only was I aware of the vast rhythm enveloping all, but I was a part of it, and it was a part of me. So let's take a moment to breathe. And since we opened with some attention to the Latin word veritas, we might also consider that spir, S-P-I-R, in Latin, is the root of to breathe, as well as spirit, and of course, inspiration. As you move into your work in the world, please look out for those times when both social norms and laws are out of step with what you know to be the way of integrity and truth. Pause and note them, and then go ahead and lead us beyond them, forward into the future with your designs. Ethics as inspiration. And remember, before he became a skyscraper, William James counseled us to embrace the hard challenges we face. It is our attitude at the beginning of a difficult task which, more than anything else, will affect its successful outcome. Thank you for having the courage of heart to be here now, taking on this role in our society. You carry the creative life force that can bring us to our senses and to our conscience, and design better human societies that work within and with this living planet we call home. Congratulations to you, the extraordinary class of 2024.